अथ rāga-rakta-parīkṣā nāma ṣaṣṭhaṁ prakaraṇam.
अथ rāga-rakta-parīkṣā nāma ṣaṣṭhaṁ prakaraṇam. MMK Chapter 6, Exploration of Redness and the Reddened One, or Exploration of Blushing and the Blusher. So I'm going to start by explaining why I like to translate it as blushing and the blusher. So word by word, raga means redness and rakta means reddened. So they're both from the root rang, which means to redden. So raga is the noun and it means redness and hence impatient desire, craving, lust. And rakta, it's a past participle, so it means reddened, hence the reddened one. It also means reddening, as past participle includes that meaning, reddening. So it could be translated the reddening one, i.e. the blusher. Parīkṣā, exploring, exploration. Nāma, named, by name, titled. ṣaṣṭhaṁ, sixth. Prakaraṇam, chapter. And on the recitation on bodhisvara.com, he begins the chapter titles by saying atta. So atta means and now, next. So atta rāga-rakta-parīkṣā nāma ṣaṣṭhaṁ prakaraṇam. And so, chapter 6, titled Exploration of Blushing and the Blusher. So, maybe first start by revisiting the word parīkṣā. And in so doing, of course, in revisiting exploration, that's a perfect example of visiting the now being visited, isn't it? It's visiting. So, possibly not a primary kind of practice to explore what exploring is. But I was thinking again about it anyway in terms of we've explored darshana, which before it means seeing, it means the act of listening, and before it means seeing, it means the act of looking, and then shravana, before it means hearing, it means the act of listening. So what about the sixth sense? What about mana? Before it means the sensing mind, in other words, before it means feeling, before it means proprioception, what does it mean? And I think it means being open to the possibility of staying still or moving. We haven't got a word for it. They haven't got a word for it in Sanskrit, so mana means the mind, but it also means thinking. And in Alexander work, thinking, letting the neck be free, to let the head go forward and up, to let the back lengthen and widen, sending the knees forwards and away. Thinking is, Marjorie Barley used to say, it has a lot in common with what the Buddhists call mindfulness. In fact, I heard her say that in 1995 at a lecture in Birmingham, which is on record somewhere. It was recorded by Pat Martins, an Alexander teacher in Birmingham with whom I was having lessons as it happened. So there's Marjorie saying mindfulness. She forgot the word actually. It says it has a lot in common. She was talking about thinking. Thinking was the title of the lecture. And Marjorie said, thinking has a lot in common with what the Buddhists call, what do they call it? You all know. And the word she was looking for was mindfulness. But what I can say from experience on Marjorie's teaching table, that's where that suggestion comes from. It means openness to the or opening to the possibility of staying still or moving. It is probably, most Alexander teachers would describe it as kind of listening. And that's fair enough, because it's mainly through the vestibular channel. So I remember Paul Medal saying that, or was it Peter Blythe, that the ear is the organ of sound, of sensing movement, and it senses very rapid movement, which is sound waves, and it also senses very, very slow movement, like the movement of the diaphragm, or a movement like this, swaying left and right, as sometimes we do at the beginning of Zazen, stimulating the vestibular system. And it's actually the very slow movements which are very effective in reflex inhibition work, somehow replicating what the baby would experience in its very earliest weeks, days and weeks in the womb. A very, very slow floating movements, floating in the amniotic fluid, or whatever it is the early embryo moves in. And thinking about that, thinking about the meaning of exploring as being the kind of openness that's there without the urge to feel something, to see or to hear, to get the point. I remember an episode in the mid-80s when I was sitting in Nishijima Sensei's office opposite him on the table, and he had his glasses on. He used to wear glasses to read. He'd be reading his Shobo Genzo, and I can't remember what stimulated it, but I just had the question, you know, what is this all about? It was just like I stopped asking questions and just thought, what the hell is going on here? You know, what is your game, sort of thing. So I just started looking at Nishijima Sensei. I just started looking at him with a totally an open outlook. And his first thing was he took his glasses off like it was going to be a staring match. And so he kind of stared at me quite aggressively, for like I was somehow challenging his authority, but I wasn't. So I just kept, I didn't stiffen up or show any kind of aggression. I just kept looking. And that carried on for a little while. And then he sort of understood what was going on. And he just joined his hands together and we bowed to each other, and then just carried on. Not a word after was ever said about it, but it stuck in my memory as it, for some reason, I've been inspired just to stop whatever was going on and just ask the question. And I remember it now when we're talking about looking as opposed to seeing, because I didn't intend to see anything. Somehow I intuited that would be something to practice, just looking. It's the same game that Marjorie said, you know, get in front of the mirror or put your computer screen on and practice just looking without any desire to see anything or to change anything, to practice just looking. And so I think parīkṣā, exploring, has that sense. Just as it happened this morning as I was turning over a compost heap, on Radio 4 came somebody who was visiting Plum Village in Bordeaux, where Thich Nhat Hanh used to practice. And first thing they started talking about was compost, and the saying, no mud, no lotus, which is really an expression of emptiness there. And the thing that, one of the things that struck me there was their use of the word looking. They're talking about looking into. looking into things. They use that word themselves quite a lot. I'd never noticed before. But they don't talk about seeing reality. They talk about looking into this, looking into being. And so that makes me think again about the very key verse in chapter 26. Avidyayam nirodayam samskaranam asambhavaha. Where ignorance is being stopped, or where ignorance has been stopped, samskaranam, of samskaras, asambhavaha, there is a non-coming into being. There is a non-coming into being of samskaras. Avidyaya nirodastu, but the stopping of ignorance, jnanasyasya bhavanat, is thanks to cultivating understanding of just this. And the just this in question is the previous verse, which I just intend to quote now, but got the wrong one. So the previous verse is samsara mulam samskaran. The samskaras, which are the root of samsara, avidavan samskarotyata. Thus does the ignorant one do, or thus does the ignorant one accumulate. So the ignorant one accumulates samskaras, or does samskaras, in three ways: with body, mouth, and mind. But having said that, the Buddha very much emphasized the volitional aspects of samskaras. So, for example, Ananda Jyoti Bhikkhu favours the translation of samskaras as volitions. And that kind of tallies with Alexander's point that this work is the most mental thing there is. Okay, it has to do with stopping physical doings and using the voice well, so stopping vocal doings. Having said that, it's the most mental thing there is. So the primary thing is to stop doing samskaras with the mind. So again, samsara mulam samskaran avidvan samskarotyata. The samskaras, the doings which are the root of samsara, thus does the ignorant one do. Avidvan karakas tasman. Therefore, tasman, the ignorant one, avidvan, before Sandhi, avidvan, karakas tasma, avidvan karakas tasman, avidvan, the ignorant one, karakas, the doer, karakaha, nominative singular masculine, the doer, avidvan, nominative singular masculine. Tasman, therefore, avidvan karakas tasman, therefore the ignorant one is the doer. Navidvams tattva darshanat. Navidvams, that's before Sandhi, navidvan, not the wise one, not the one who knows. Navidvan, nominative singular masculine again, navidvan, not the one who knows, not the wise one. Tattva darshanat. Darshana, because of darshana, tattva. Tattva means reality, what is, vastness. So tattva darshanat, because of realizing reality, or because of reality being realized, or probably that I'm guessing the phraseology that Thich Nhat Hanh might have approved, because of looking into reality, because of looking into what is. And I think that works fairly well, at least at the ostensible level. And then we can talk about the hidden meaning is reality realizing itself. When we get out of the way, the right thing does itself. So in that sense, tattva darshanat could be thanks to reality realizing itself. But at the ostensible level, using kind of everyday language, it might be difficult to beat Thich Nhat Hanh's looking into, then looking into tattva, what is, because of looking into what is, because of looking into reality. And for Thich Nhat Hanh, the reality means the reality of what he calls interbeing. So interbeing is his attempt to put into more everyday English the teaching of dependent arising. What is, so that, or as some people call it, the interdependent arising. So as a result of the interdependent arising, you've got interbeing. But the point I'm exploring, like a true academic would. Sounds like a PhD thesis, doesn't it? The exploration of exploration in France in the early years of the 21st century. Somebody will write a PhD thesis in 100 years. Exploration of exploring. So what this chapter is then is exploration of rāga-rakta. So blushing and the blusher. Why have I thought to translate it like that? So what I'm hoping to do now is deepen my understanding of what Nāgārjuna meant by exploration of blushing. But back in 1974, 1975, it wasn't just a problem to be explored. It was a problem to be solved, as if my life depended on it, because I suffered from what I later discovered was called chronic blushing, which was where the fear that you're going to go red causes you to go red. So at the root of that, I think Nāgārjuna is going to suggest there's the concern of who am I, and am I wrong? I'm afraid, I sense there's something wrong in me, and I'm afraid because I don't want to be left behind by the herd, and I don't want to be trapped in a small space where I'm sticking out because of my blushing face, drawing attention to myself and drawing ridicule from people, being laughed at for being the one who's a bit strange, who doesn't fit in. This is what teenagers would tend to be afraid of before they're struggling with who they really are. So at the root of that, there is a sense of me being the blusher. And there is this problem, this terrible, terrible problem, blushing. So that's how I conceived it, when I was 14 or 15. And I think we're going to see in this chapter that what Nāgārjuna, the way forward is to explore those fundamental conceptions of, is there a blusher? In what sense is there a blusher? And if there is a blusher, so what? What does that mean in practice? What practical step does that lead to? And is there actually such a thing as blushing? And again, if there is, so what? What implications does that have in terms of how we should worry about it? And then another thing I was reflecting on as I was composting this morning was Atmavad Upadana. Upadana is clinging or attaching. And Atmavad Upadana is one of the 4 kinds of clinging, one of the 4 kinds of attaching. So it's attaching to views, Drishtopadana, attaching to desires, Kamopadana. Shila Vratopadana is attaching to virtual discipline, Shila, and Vrata, vows of practice. And then Atmavadopadana is clinging to Atma, self, Vada, talking or stories, narratives. So clinging to stories of self, you could say. clinging to one's own story. And just in the same way that Shila Vrat Upadana, the fault in it is in the Upadana, it's in the clinging. It's not in the virtue or vows of practice. And similarly so in Atmavad Upadana, telling one's own story is not, there's not a fault in that. It isn't, telling one's own story isn't part of the dependent arising of suffering, unless there's attachment to it, which I suppose practically all the time there would be, but at least in principle, you know, because I'm reflecting, is there any merit in telling my story of why I think I was susceptible to this chronic blushing? And then I thought, well, it doesn't do any harm as long as there's no attachment to telling of the story. So I think the story was that when I was a baby, my parents would have been just out of their teenage years, you know. So there must have been a strong sexual chemistry between two such young people. I haven't got any direct conscious memory of it, but there is a story where practically the first words that I learned to speak is typically being a little explorer and a pest, and sort of trying to find the limits of things. While I was still in my pram, I realised I must have heard my dad saying sexy, calling my mother sexy, and so in the pram I must have started saying sexy, sexy, and of course I would have realised that this was mortifying my mother as she pushed me down the shops, and I'm chirping sexy, sexy, and of course then I realised that I was getting a rise out of her by saying it. So I had these powerful words, you know, sexy, sexy. So that's the story as I remember it. But then I don't know what the response was to that, but I do know that when I was 12, 13, 14, I would be very afraid that the word sex would even be mentioned, you know, even if it was somebody on the TV. I remember Morecambe and Wise, for example. Eric used to say to Ernie, "What's that word, Ernie?" And I used to think, "Oh, the word must be sex," and I'd start going red. You know, it's as Marjorie said, the inveterate worrier. So I think in the first couple of verses we're going to study in a minute shortly, I think Nāgārjuna is going to say, you know, what's the point of worrying about that? When you actually stop and think about what good worrying is about it. I think that's what he's going to say. But for me, it was something I really, really worried about a lot. So that's rakta, blushing. That's rakta, the blusher. And then raga, redness, is the blushing. So redness, I think this chapter has generally been translated the exploration of desire and the one who desires. But if you think about what is going red, physiologically it's excitement of the sympathetic nervous system. And if we're going down the path of convenient physiological fictions, then we could discuss the link between the sympathetic nervous system being unduly excited and the moro reflex, the primitive fear response, which is opposed to fear paralysis, whose colour is more white or blue. The moro reflex, I would always explain it, working as a reflex therapist, its colour is red. And then sometimes, if you give somebody a shock, you'll see the moro reflex and their fear paralysis response sort of fighting out for supremacy. So they'll go red and then go white again and then go red and then end up being pale. And actually, that was me on the bus, because I'd go through these phases of sweating and going red, and by the time I got off the bus, I would feel totally drained. You know, like all the redness had flushed out of me, and I was kind of white and exhausted. Reduced to a dribble of sweat was the phrase that seemed to sum it up. So then, if we're thinking subjectively or psychologically, there's not only desire, because end-gaining desire, impatient end-gaining desire is associated with redness. Also is anger, humiliation, embarrassment. Most strong emotions are associated with going red. So then, just in the same ways, we could examine whether the one who goes red exists or not. If there is strong emotion, like, for example, anger, how should one deal with it? We usually think about it like that, but then that's kind of imbuing anger with a non-empty, existent quality. And again, I think that's what Nāgārjuna is going to cause us to question, to what extent our conception of there being anger ultimately is that reasonable. And the answer is very likely to turn out to be no.
अथ राग-रक्त-परीक्षा नाम षष्ठं प्रकरणम्।